Hello everybody, this is Stardust Express, Angelika Simpson. My show is about truth issues, mysteries, metaphysics, spirituality, health and sacred sites. I will be presenting tonight a video concerning and a presentation concerning a find that relates to ancient Egypt, followed by two videos that deal with the probable location of Atlantis. I hope you will enjoy this. After I finish my presentation tonight, I will check in if there have been any feedback from you concerning my vision work I'm doing week by week. And the last homework I gave you, maybe there are some questions, but if so, I will deal with this. And I will continue giving you some vision work to do by giving you a new visualization and another homework to do. I hope you enjoy my show. Let's get started. The first video I'm presenting to you is from Ancient Architects. It is called The Path to the Egyptian Underworld, the Wall of the Crow. The Wall of the Crow seems to be one of the best and oldest monuments in Egypt. It is in the southeastern corner of the Sphinx and her temples. It is off the beaten track and is rarely visited by tourists, but it really is the hidden gem of ancient Egypt. We are going to look more closely at it. The wall is 656 feet long, 32 feet high. Egyptologists are certain it dates back to the Old Kingdom, 4th dynasty between 2565 and 2465 BC, the same age as the Giza pyramids and the Sphinx, according to the Egyptologists. They offer no reason why it was built, but that is because, for sure, the Wall of the Crow is far older than we are told. Egyptologist Mark Lehner suggests that the wall was never completed because the masonry was never dressed to produce a finished face, as they did with the Egyptian pyramids, tombs, and temple walls. This does not seem to be good evidence because the majority of ancient Egyptian tombs and temples are far younger than the Giza Plateau. Ancient architects believe. And as for the pyramids, they are certainly ancient and were more than likely just recased in dynastic time. The Sphinx, the Giza pyramids, and the Wall of the Crow, without any doubt, hark back to a forgotten time in ancient history. Egyptologists call it a wall, but the Wall of the Crow is more akin to a causeway. By the Giza pyramids causeways, it heads out to where the Nile would have been in ancient times. And its height means that it would have been above the waterline. We know that the causeway of Khafre's pyramid, for example, led to the Valley Temple, where access to the Nile was possible. The Wall of the Crow seems to mirror this function and is therefore more likely to be a causeway instead of a wall. This was an idea originally put forward by the explorer Howard Wise. Orthodox Egyptologists don't seem to accept it. Anyone who is taking a closer look to the Wall of the Crow will quickly realize that it contains one of the largest gateways in the ancient world. Although it has been visible for thousands of years, very little has been written about it. The gateway is 8.5 feet wide, 23 feet high, and as the base of the wall is 32 feet thick, the gateway looks truly more like a short tunnel. Interestingly, tunnels are features found only at two of the Giza causeways, on Khufu's and Khafre's pyramids, and most likely Menkaura's too. The main difference between the tunnel in the Wall of the Crow's causeway and those of the pyramid's causeways is that the former looks like a purpose-made feature, whereas the latter examples look more to be an afterthought. The Wall of the Crow contains some truly enormous blocks of limestone and therefore has a lot in common with the Cyclopean masonry of the Valley Temples, which most independent researchers agree predates the dynastic era. The photos available on the internet and those included within this video are only showing the top of the structure. 2/3 of it are hidden from view, very deep beneath the sand. If archaeologists would excavate it in its entirety, it would certainly be an awesome sight to behold. The architectural wonder would definitely not go unnoticed by tourists. But maybe that is exactly why it has been kept buried, because the Wall of the Crow actually changes everything we know about Giza. As stated, this is not just a wall, it is without doubt the causeway. But Egyptologists will happily point out, if it is a causeway, why isn't there anything at either end? It is a valid point, so we do need to take a closer look. If you walk along the causeway to the west, it ends in the middle of the modern cemetery, an area that can never and will never be excavated in our lifetime for obvious reasons. So there would well be something buried at the end of the wall, but there can also be nothing. So the question is, why was there a cemetery built at this spot? According to ancient architects, the cemetery marks the position of the entrance into the underworld, known as the Tomb of Sokar, and this is clearly what the causeway was leading towards. But causeways always have structures and on both ends, and luckily for us, the eastern end of the cemetery, the eastern end of the Wall of the Crow is not located inside any cemetery, but ends abruptly in the sand. So, what is going on? Surely something was there once upon a time, and thanks to the incredible Giza geometry work by researcher Sergio Alfonso Rivino, we know there must have been. The Great Pyramid, the Menkaure Pyramid, and the very eastern end of the Wall of the Crow forms a perfect 3-4-5 triangle. Furthermore, the baseline of this triangle runs precisely along Menkaure's causeway, which means this alignment is certainly no accident. There must have been something at the eastern end of the Wall of the Crow, and it would suggest a structure of some kind. Ancient architects think that the Wall of the Crow and the area that surrounds it is the most ancient part of Giza. That included the primordial mound of creation, which today is known as Gibel or Gibli. The evidence states that within the modern cemetery is the entrance to the House of Sokar, which is the entrance to the Duat, or underworld. But we also know there was once a sanctuary which held the sacred Hemu bird boat of Sokar. Ancient architects have previously hypothesized that the Hemu bird sanctuary was just west of Gebo Gibli, because at this location Flinders Petrie discovered fragments of granite masonry, which indicates there was clearly once a grand building. But they now propose another idea. From old to new dynastic times, there was the well-documented festival of Sokar that took place at Giza and involved carrying the Hemu bark boat from the sanctuary towards the entrance of the underworld. On its arrival, the secret and mysteries of Sokar would be enacted. The new hypothesis proposes that the Hemu bark sanctuary, once set at the eastern end of the wall, of the crow, which in ancient times would have been seen to be rising out of the river Nile. Ancient architects suggest that during the festival of Soka, the sacred boat would be dragged from the sanctuary east to west along the wall of the Crow Causeway, 32 feet above the ground level, so that all could see as it approaches the entrance to the underworld. This east to west orientation would be mimicking the movement of the sun traveling across the sky. They would suggest that there would have been steps at the western end of the wall of the Crow so that boats can be taken down and lowered into the underworld, signifying the sun going down and into the Duat. Interestingly, many scholars already believe Soka's boat, the Hinnu bark, is the origin of the sun god Ra's septet boat, the boat in which he sailed across the sky in the second half of his daily journey, and in which he entered the underworld in the evening. It is also interesting to note that the harpist's song from the tomb of the son of Thutmose II describes the practice of placing the Hinnu bark on its sledge and then going around the walls with his followers. This makes one think where the tunnels through the Giza causeways actually created to allow the Hinnu bark to move around the Giza plateau. On the day of the festival of Soka, did it actually follow a specific route around the Acropolis, with its final leg across the wall of the Crow, before descending into the underworld? Having a modern cemetery built on the location of the underworld is certainly fitting. And so, storing Soka's holy boat at the eastern end of the wall of the Crow at a location on the river Nile is also certainly fitting. Whatever the truth might be, it is most certain the wall of the Crow was the causeway that led into the underworld. A causeway of cultic significance, and having the sanctuary of the Hinnu bark at the eastern end of the causeway certainly makes logical sense. Geometric calculations show there must have been something at the eastern end. Surely its foundations are there beneath the sand, waiting to be revealed. The wall of the Crow Causeway, the Hinnu bark sanctuary, the house of Soka, and the primordial mound at Gebo Gibli are all in one location. And according to ancient architects, this is arguably the most significant, the most ancient part of the Giza necropolis, completely neglected by authorities and unknown to tourists. We should be focusing our efforts here in order to understand the true history of Giza, a history that surely is thousands of years older than what we are currently told. Well, I thank ancient architects for their great work and amazing presentation. I had never heard of the wall before. Makes you wonder what they are hiding beneath the whole of the Giza Plateau, as they are not allowing excavations to take place. But it would be fascinating to be able to excavate in the sand and to see what is there. The next video I want to present is part of my own research into Atlantis, into firstly the possibility that Atlantis ever existed, and if so, where. So my first video today again is from ancient architects. It is entitled New Theory, The Lost Island of Atlantis Revealed. Now it is time for archaeological investigations. Enjoy the video.
Hello everybody, and welcome to Ancient Architects. Please subscribe now to get the latest ancient history news and independent research from around the world. With more than 2 million views on his fantastic recent video on Atlantis, Jimmy on the Bright Insight channel has brought the age-old debate of the location of the lost island of Atlantis back to the forefront of our minds. He presents the hypothesis put forward by George S. Alexander and Natalis Rosen that the strange natural formation known as the Rikat structure in Mauritania, Africa, is the location of Atlantis. And the evidence presented is certainly compelling, with the circular concentric structure seemingly matching the description written by Plato. I won't go over it now, as you can watch Jimmy's excellent presentation, linked in the description below, but even though the hypothesis proposed by Alexander and Rosen is persuasive, it does fall down quite heavily on a number of points. In this video, I will explain why I believe the Rikat structure is not Atlantis, but in the second half of the video, I'll tell you exactly where I think it is, and will present the evidence accordingly. So, where to start? Well, if we are using Plato's words as evidence for a physical Atlantis, we cannot be selective in the passages we choose. For example, on a number of occasions, Plato quite clearly talks of an island, the largest of a group. He is also quite clear that an earthquake sank it, and it became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers sailing. So, if we believe the words written by Plato, based on information gathered by Solon's visit to Egypt, when looking for Atlantis, we need to be looking for an island that is now below a shallow sea, which is likely to be a high bank covered by mud that makes it difficult to sail over or to. Plato is also quite clear that the island of Atlantis is not circular, but the main city of the island is. He is quite clear that in the centre of the whole island was a large flat fertile plain, surrounded by mountains. He says that this plain is in the centre, but on the side towards the sea, which to me infers that the entire island of Atlantis was off the coast of unspecified mainland. For example, there was a side facing the sea and a side facing land. There was also a deep ditch or channel that surrounded the plain. Close to this plain was a mountain that wasn't very high, which I assume Plato means was a large hill. The famous image of alternating circles of sea and land comes from Plato saying that surrounding the hill were alternate zones of sea and land, encircling one another, 2 of land and 3 of water. This is where a city and a palace was apparently eventually built, but this is just one small part of Atlantis, and not the entire island as described by Plato. He says that this part of the island looked towards the south and was sheltered from the north, which implies that the circular city was towards the south of the main island. He describes that it looked as though the circular features had been turned with a lathe, equidistant every way. And granted, the Rikat structure does look just like that, but the other features mentioned by Plato are, in my opinion, missing, and I will go into this in more detail shortly. The ruler of the land of Atlantis was Poseidon, who had 10 children, and the eldest, Atlas, received the entire island of Atlantis, and the rest of the children received, and I quote, divers islands in the open sea. This is suggesting that there are in fact a group of islands, one of which is large with a hill or mountain, surrounded by concentric circles of water and land, and also with a very large fertile plain. This plain was surrounded by mountains or higher ground, which descended in height towards the sea. Plato said that Atlantis was generally very lofty and precipitous on the side of the sea. Taking the flat fertile plain specifically, Plato said that it was smooth and even, and an oblong shape, extending in one direction around 3,000 stadia, which is around 555 kilometers. This is clearly a major focal point of the island of Atlantis, and a feature that shows that the Rikat structure simply cannot be it. Plato goes on to say that the plain is rectangular and for the most part straight and oblong, another detail that those seeking Atlantis have to include in their interpretation. In my opinion, this detail cannot be left out. The size and shape of the plain is a key point to remember in the latter part of this video, where I believe I identify exactly where Atlantis is. There is no 555-kilometre plain surrounded by mountains next to the Richat structure, and of course we know, geologically, that it was never an island. The common misconception when searching for Atlantis is to be on the lookout for a 24-kilometre diameter circular island, when in actual fact we should be looking for an oblong island with a large flat rectangular plain surrounded by high land and also containing a circular hill with concentric circles of land and water to the south. It would now be partly destroyed, somewhat deformed by an earthquake, covered in mud and also under the sea. It may be difficult to find due to the time that has passed and Plato's account of catastrophe, but there must be a structure out there located within the open sea but close to the mainland. This information on Atlantis is taken from Timaeus, written by Plato between 428 and 347 BC, and as stated, to me this is clearly not describing the Richat structure. To go over these main points one final time, the Richat structure is a concentric circular structure, but I wouldn't say there is a hill or mountain in the centre. The circular Richat structure is actually a depression, and certainly not high ground. The Richat structure sits within an ellipsoid-shaped area that is uplifted and landlocked in the continent of Africa. It was never part of an island because northwest Africa was never covered by the sea in recent times. Plato says there were smaller divers islands nearby, but there is no evidence of any islands near the Richat structure. It wasn't near any inland lakes and was hundreds of kilometres from the Atlantic Ocean. There is also no evidence of a great flood reaching this part of Mauritania around 11,000 years ago, or the Richat structure ever being totally submerged. It is actually geologically impossible with what we know about sea levels following the Younger Dryas. Plato is clear that the island of Atlantis was submerged. The elevation of the Richat structure is too high, and geologically it certainly wasn't a great deal lower 11,000 years ago. Due to the land elevation, for seawater to reach the circular depression of the Richat, it would have to travel hundreds of kilometres inland from the Atlantic and then go up and over the high ground ellipsoid-shaped structure that surrounds the Richat, which is highly unlikely even if there was a mega tsunami. The eye-shaped structure that includes the Richat looks to have been created by magma upwelling and erupting at the surface. It is badly weathered and geologically it is many millions of years old. Richat therefore isn't recently uplifted. The main evidence though is that Plato's own words totally disprove the idea that the Richat structure could be Atlantis, but I don't doubt that it was a settlement in prehistoric times, as the finds shown in the recent video on the Lost History channel have shown. But I don't like to just critique a hypothesis and not present my own, and I do think I have found a better contender for where Atlantis is, and it is based on a number of factors. In fact, I'm actually convinced I've found Atlantis. For me, Plato's description is the obvious starting point, an island now beneath the waves, through the Pillars of Hercules in the Atlantic Ocean, but also off the coast of the mainland, with a sea-facing side and a land-facing side. I began scouring old maps and there are a number of contenders, such as High Brazil near Ireland, but although now beneath the waves, it was a small circular island that didn't match Plato's description. But then I came across a lost island known as Frisland. Frisland is marked on virtually all maps of the North Atlantic from the 1560s to the 1660s. It is located northwest of Ireland, south of Iceland and southeast of Greenland. The Faroe Islands are on its northeastern side, and there are a number of small circular islands that surround it. Scholars say it is a cartographic mistake for Iceland, but in 1558 the influential Zeno map charted the landmass alongside Iceland, showing that it was its own separate place. Today, Frisland does not exist, so why do a number of maps include it? Either A, it existed in the 15 and 1600s, B, these maps are copied from a number of older source maps, just like the famous Piri Reis map, or C, the map makers were all mistaken or were lying. Personally, I believe it wasn't a mistake, and I firmly believe that Frisland is the remains of Atlantis. And furthermore, I know exactly where it is, and I'll try to put forward my evidence in this video. By all accounts, Frisland would have been close to Ireland, and there are famous Irish legends of the Tuatha Dé Danann, or Children of Danu, who were tall, slender, light-skinned people who arrived in Ireland in boats from the north. They were not thought to be gods, but a druidic race with a rare insight into the workings of nature. Mythology says that they were scientific people who comprehended the laws of nature. They had knowledge of the curative and power properties of plants, and used them for treatment of various diseases, wounds, and also made spells. They were very skillful craftsmen and musicians, soldiers and poets, and their weapons were considered the best and most modern. It was sociologically advanced, and women had the same civil rights as men, and even participated in war. In Irish mythology, the land to the north had a number of names, including Tir na nOg, meaning the land of the youth, and also Tir Fo Tuan, which interestingly translates to the land under the wave. Little is known about this land, but by all accounts it was a land of stunning beauty. It was also known as the Otherworld, which is not so much an afterlife, but an earthly yet magical place. The Tuatha Dé Danann were equipped with 4 magical relics: the Stone of Destiny, the Sword of Nuada, which later became known as Excalibur, the Spear of Lu, also known as the Spear of Destiny, and the Cauldron of Dagda, which some believe is the origin of the Holy Grail. The Irish god of the sea was Manannán mac Lir, the son of the sea god Lir, and he was the ruler and guardian of the Otherworld, which we have already identified as the mythical island to the north, sometimes known as the land under the wave. When you look at the descriptions and the attributes of the sea god Manannán, it becomes clear that he is one and the same as the god known to Plato and the Greeks as Poseidon, who was the ruler of Atlantis before giving kingship to his son. Manannán owned a golden spear, called Patan Buid, which means yellow tree, a spear with a branched tip like a trident, which of course was a weapon that was wielded by Poseidon. He also owned a golden chariot drawn by magical horses, which can ride across the sea or land, much like Poseidon and his 4-horse chariot. There are also some researchers who have written that the homeland of the Tuatha Dé Danann, the Tir na nOg, sank under the waves during a catastrophic flood, and that is why the Tuatha Dé Danann settled in Ireland. Now, as I've already mentioned, Poseidon ruled Atlantis, and as the Irish sea god Manannán is one and the same as Poseidon, the Irish otherworld known as Tir na nOg could therefore identify with Atlantis. From Plato's description, Atlantis was beyond the Pillars of Hercules, which is in the Atlantic Ocean, and there is an assumption that it is somewhere near the Azores Islands. The Irish legends also locate the land of the Tuatha Dé Danann in the Atlantic, but specifically north of Ireland, and, as the ancient maps of the 15 and 1600s show, there is one rectangular-shaped island to the north, which is not present in the modern day, a truly sunken, lost island. This island and the true identity of Atlantis, in my opinion, was surely Frisland. And contrary to what the scholars say, that Frisland is nothing more than a mythical land, this couldn't be further from the truth. It is easily located on modern topographical maps as a large island, just under the sea to the northwest of Ireland, very close to the Faroe Islands, which they themselves are the tips of mountains of a sunken land of the same rock formation as Frisland. And there is yet more evidence to connect Ireland's Tuatha Dé Danann and Plato's Atlantis. The main city of Atlantis, as mentioned, was composed of 3 concentric rings, and in the centre was a hill with a palace or temple on top. In Ireland, close to the River Boyne, is an area known as the Hill of Tara, once an ancient seat of power where 142 kings are said to have reigned in prehistoric and historic times. Irish mythology says that the Tuatha Dé Danann came to Ireland and this was their dwelling place. One structure on the summit, known as Teak Cormac, looks like a mini yet still large version of the famous circular city of Atlantis. It is on top of the hill with concentric banks and ditches, and inside is the inauguration stone of the ancient kings of Tara. Maybe this is a coincidence, or maybe these are the memories of the survivors of the lost island. Some of the Atlantean survivors are believed to have settled in Egypt, and their stories relate to the first time known as Zep Tepi. I have covered parts of this in my recent videos on Egypt's primordial mound and underworld. Back in 2011, scientists at Zurich-based DNA genealogy centre iGenia reconstructed the DNA profile of King Tutankhamun, and the results showed that the 18th dynasty ruler had a genetic profile group known as haplogroup R1b1a2, to which more than 50% of all men in Western Europe belong to. This infers that the ruling class of ancient Egypt, at least in the 18th dynasty, could have been related to light-skinned Europeans like the description of the ancient Irish Tuatha Danann. Of course, there are many examples of clearly African origin ancient Egyptians, but by all accounts it was a multicultural country in historic times. Several statues of pharaohs with their wives, as well as the discovery of red and blonde-haired mummies, certainly indicates that Caucasoid Europeans were in positions of power at various times in Egypt's ancient history. In fact, an ancient pre-dynastic mummy discovered at Gebelein, Egypt dates back to around 3400 BC and had golden hair, and scientists say that the individual also had light skin. This is just one example of many, and is included in this presentation to illustrate the idea that Atlantis could certainly be an island in Western Europe, if the ancient Egyptian ruling class did originate from Plato's Lost Island. I also made a video a number of months ago which detailed yet more links between ancient Egypt and ancient Ireland. It discusses the legend of Scotia, a daughter of a pharaoh who came to Scotland and Ireland. Maybe she was searching for her ancestral homeland, who knows? Today, the submerged island of Frisland is very close to the Faroe Islands, which gives us some idea of what Atlantis may have looked like. This picture, in my opinion, looks like a modern-day Atlantis-like landscape, with lakes winding around hilltops. And look at the tops of the mountains. Is it just me, or are these pyramid-like in form? Were the Giza pyramids actually a homage to the homeland? Again, it's just a hypothesis, but to me, there was a striking resemblance. Also in the Faroe Islands, there are found black, red and light grey rocks, coal, sandstone and weathered basalt, and the coal on the Faroe Islands has certainly been mined. These are the most common rocks in the area, and this again matches Plato's description of the types of rocks found on Atlantis, which he describes as black, white and red in colour. Before the Younger Dryas event, the island I've identified as Frisland was certainly an island above the sea, and Britain and Ireland were well and truly part of the continent. But other evidence aside, if I have already discounted the Rikat structure as being Atlantis, based on Plato's descriptions, does Frisland fare any better? Well, in actual fact, yes it does. We obviously cannot see the same level of detail as the Rikat structure, as Frisland has been submerged for many thousands of years, covered by mudslides, possibly hit by an earthquake as Plato says, and therefore it is subject to some level of deformation. But here are my reasons why this could be Atlantis, based on Plato's words. 1. It is a submerged island in the Atlantic Ocean as Plato says. 2. This area would have been land before the Younger Dryas event. 3. When covered by mud from the deluge, being shallow, boats would have struggled to pass over it as Plato says. 4. It has one sea-facing side and one land-facing side, inferred by Plato. 5. There is a clear rectangular flat plain in the centre of the island, which amazingly is roughly 500 kilometres in length, matching Plato's description. And 6. There are mountains to the north, and the rectangular plain is surrounded by mountainous high ground, exactly how Plato describes it. But where is the city? Where is the hill to the south of the island, surrounded by concentric features of land and water? Well, on every 16th and 17th century map of Friesland, it is exactly where you'd expect it to be. And although badly eroded and partly wiped out, the structure in question is still clearly traceable on modern topographical maps, on the southwestern edge of the landmass, in exactly the position I would expect it. On the historic maps, it is an unusual feature, an oval island surrounded by smaller islands, also arranged in an oval. The island is in the south, and the high ground and hills of Atlantis shelter it from the north, just as Plato said. But of course, Plato was quite clear that the city was circular. So, looking on Google Maps, if you zoom in close to the central island of this oval feature, astonishingly, you can actually see that it is not actually an oval as the 16th century maps show. But it is perfectly circular, and not only that, it too contains concentric details, and the innermost hill is approximately 24 kilometers in diameter, just like Plato said. We can see all this detail on a structure that is badly eroded, was hit by a deluge, an earthquake, and is now heavily covered in sediment. Shapes will be obscured, but in my opinion, everything is here, and therefore this really must be the true location of Plato's Atlantis. At the very least, I can confirm that this area of land to the northwest of Ireland is the Friesland on the ancient maps. But I think I've discovered more than that. I think this is the only possible and logical location for Plato's Atlantis, and everything seems to fit. The landmass is also clearly the Irish Tin and Og, and evidence suggests it is also the same island as the British legend of Avalon, which I'll discuss in a later video. I'm sure there will be many questions after this video, many problems to solve, and I'm sure I'll have many more videos to come as I take this hypothesis one stage further. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ancient Architects. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to the channel, please like the video, and please leave a comment below. Thank you very much.
Before I continue to present my next video, I would like to reply to the question in the chat room, which was, why do I think no one has been able to find Atlantis so far? Lots of people say they have found it, but there has been so little proof. This is absolutely correct. And I think tonight I will not be able to give you the proper location of Atlantis, because I don't know, did Atlantis really exist, or is it just mystery? Is it just a fable? We don't know. And then we don't know what is Atlantis. Some people say Atlantis is a big city. Some people say Atlantis was an island. Some people say Atlantis was as big as a proper continent. So, and because we don't even know that, it's very difficult to find the location. And another thing I think makes it difficult is there have been, over the billions of years of this planet, so many earth changes. Continents sunk, new territory came out of the waters, and so much has been destroyed and newly created. It's really difficult, and we have never been told a proper history, our proper history as far as time is concerned, and nobody has even admitted how old humanity really is and how advanced humanity was thousands and even millions of years ago. So it is stopped from conventional history and archaeology and science to make proper research into it, but I hope it will continue. And then another chat saying that they thought Atlantis was of India. Again, yes. Today, I'm only presenting two possibilities. I know there are much more, and I will continue to present whatever is coming up. So, yes, India is another possibility. I totally agree. All right, so to come to my next presentation, to compare with the first video, It is about the same subject, and this time the video is from Bright Insight, and it's entitled The Lost City of Atlantis, Hidden in Plain Sight, Advanced Ancient Human Civilization. And it is another compelling theory on the possible location of Atlantis. Enjoy.
Not only did the lost city of Atlantis actually exist, but its true location has been hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, completely unnoticed, as we've been looking in all the wrong places for its location, since everyone assumes that it must be under the ocean somewhere, such as in the depths of the Atlantic Ocean or the Mediterranean Sea, which have long been considered to be the most likely places for its existence. And no, I am not about to suggest that Antarctica is the hidden location of Atlantis either. Because in this video, I'm going to use the exact words that Plato used to describe Atlantis, its location, and the geographical land features that surround it, which were recorded in Plato's dialogues, the Critias and the Timaeus. And many people are not even aware that the information contained in Plato's writings of Atlantis actually originate from the ancient Egyptians. And the details that Plato shared of Atlantis, which I'm about to share with you in a side-by-side comparison, will show you that the Rakart structure located in Mauritania, Africa, also commonly referred to as the Eye of the Sahara or the Eye of Africa, which most people have never even heard of, by the way, is the most likely location for the lost city of Atlantis, as it matches so many precise details of what Plato wrote. But it must first be mentioned that according to mainstream academics and historians, the legend of Atlantis is simply fictional and has been commonly referred to as a myth or even pseudo-history, which completely contradicts Plato and Solon, which described an empire referred to as Atlantis, which was known for being technologically advanced, with noble and powerful people possessing vast wealth, luxury, and knowledge, and even military superiority, and is described as being destroyed in a single day and night of misfortune, which caused the island of Atlantis to disappear into the depths of the sea, related to a massive earthquake and likely a tsunami. So first things first, Plato received all the information about Atlantis from Solon, who was his ancestral relative separated by 6 generations. Solon was born in Athens, Greece some 2,600 years ago, and was an Athenian statesman, lawmaker, and poet, remembered particularly for his efforts to legislate against political corruption and economic and social decline in Athens. He was known to be a person of wisdom and outstanding character. In Solon's later years, he traveled to Egypt in the search of knowledge, and Egypt at that time had the longest documented historical records available. And he visited Neph's temple at Sais, where he learned of the history of Atlantis from a high Egyptian priest who translated the hieroglyphs that were carved into stone within the temple, which also described that Egypt was once a colony of the Empire of Atlantis. And Neph's temple no longer exists today, as it was destroyed long ago when it was consumed by what is now the Nile Delta swamplands. However, thanks to Solon's detailed notes, the information was retained and kept for 6 generations within Plato's family, before it was published by Plato himself in the Critias and the Timaeus dialogues approximately 2,400 years ago. So one of the first things to point out is the supposed date of Atlantis' destruction according to what Solon had learned while visiting Egypt, which was that the event that destroyed the lost city had occurred 9,000 years earlier, which is a very interesting time frame, considering that Solon visited Egypt 2,600 years ago. And 9,000 years plus 2,600 years equates to 11,600 years before present time today, which just so happens to coincide with the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe, which of course I've discussed in many other videos. Long story short, to anyone that's not familiar or new to the channel, there was a massive change in global temperatures, sea levels fluctuated, a massive extinction event of 75% of mammals in North America occurred. There's even evidence of global fires said to have been larger than the ones that occurred during the extinction event that killed off the dinosaurs, scorching at least 10% of the Earth's land surface. The evidence for this event is scientifically overwhelming and is likely related to a fragmented comet. And the point is that it's very likely that this event is related in some way to the destruction of Atlantis. And for more details, I highly recommend you look into the brilliant work of Randall Carlson and Graham Hancock. But what are the odds that this date of 11,600 years ago would match so perfectly? And that's not the only thing that matches up so closely. Most notably, Atlantis was said to be made up of concentric circles, 3 rings of water and 2 of land. In fact, here are Plato's exact words. There were alternate zones of sea and land, larger and smaller, encircling one another. There were 2 of land and 3 of water, which were turned as if with a lathe, each having its circumference equidistant every way from the center. And here you can see a few animated examples of what people have created based off of Plato's description of Atlantis. Now, compare this to the Ricard structure. Just look at this. The first thing that you must understand when you see this is that this is far larger than it looks. For example, this photo right here was taken from high altitude, and what you're seeing is something around 20 miles across, or 32 kilometers. And this particular photo does not even show the entire structure, which is approximately 30 miles or 48 kilometers across. And this site can really only be appreciated from space and satellite imagery, as it covers a vast area. In fact, the Ricard structure wasn't even discovered until the Gemini 4 mission in 1965, and is now a common landmark utilized by astronauts. This thing was hiding in plain sight for thousands of years, but when you look at photos of it from the ground, you have no idea what you're looking at. Only from the sky can you understand that you are part of this massive structure containing circles within circles. And in this example, you can see one of the outer rings in the distance, yet from the ground it just looks like a hill. It's remarkable at just how much it does resemble an eye, and it makes perfect sense as to why it was given the nickname of the Eye of the Sahara and the Eye of Africa. And by the way, it is located approximately 250 miles or 400 kilometers inland off the coast of West Africa in a very remote area which is rarely visited and again unknown to most people. What's even more fascinating than its size and shape is that scientists do not know what it is or how it was formed, although they do think that it is natural and it was first theorized to have been an impact site from a meteor, but that was ruled out as there is no evidence of an impact. In fact, scientists have never seen anything like this anywhere else throughout the entire world. Their number one guess is that it was probably formed around 100 million years ago as the supercontinent Pangaea was ripped apart by plate tectonics in what is now Africa and South America. They theorize that molten rock was pushed upwards towards the surface but never made it all the way through, thus creating a dome of rock layers. And they suggest that at some point around 100 million years ago, the eye of the structure erupted, collapsing the bubble which makes up the center part of the structure, and erosion did the rest of the work to create what you see today, which is clearly heavily eroded. But this, of course, is all speculation as it cannot be proven, and again, we've never seen anything like this anywhere else throughout the world. But here's where things start to get really interesting. It just so happens that the diameter of its outer circle is approximately 23.5 kilometers or 14.5 miles, which is basically equivalent to the size and dimensions provided by Plato when converting from stadia to modern measurements. For example, the circular island of Atlantis was described as being 127 stadia. Well, one stadia is 607 feet, and 607 feet times 127 stadia is 77,089 feet. Convert that measurement, and that is 23.5 kilometers. I measured this numerous times on Google Earth, and I got anywhere from 21 kilometers to 24 kilometers. Most of my measurements were 22 kilometers in diameter, and again, this is virtually identical to Plato's and Solon's documentation. And although my own measurements through Google Earth cannot be considered exact, it is unbelievably close. So where we're at so far is that the Ricard structure matches Plato's description of having 3 circles of water and 2 of land, which is what you would see at the Ricard based off its design if there were water flowing into it. And not only that, the diameter of the outer circles matches the size described by Plato within a very small margin, if not identical. But this next detail that Plato describes is extremely interesting. He stated, and quote, "The mountains of the island of Atlantis was celebrated for their number and size and beauty," adding that the surrounding mountains of the city flowed with rivers, and this part of the island looked toward the south and was sheltered from the north. So he is stating that the mountains were on the north side, sheltering the city to the south, which is exactly what you see at the Ricard, and the mountains are on the north side. But not only that, when you look at detailed satellite photography, you can see the evidence of multiple rivers that were spilling over the side of the mountains towards Atlantis. Can you imagine what this place looked like when it wasn't so dry? Just like Plato stated, the mountains of the island of Atlantis were celebrated for their number and size and beauty. And it's a shame that the Ricard is so remote and visited so rarely, as there are so few pictures available of the view of these mountains when standing at ground level. But I can just imagine that these mountains were lush and beautiful green, with rivers and waterfalls pouring over these mountains. And the rivers were clearly there. We can see that. So it's certain that this place once looked much differently than the barren, dry desert that we see today. And this clearly matches Plato's description, and it becomes even more compelling when you consider that Plato stated that the city of Atlantis opened up to the sea at the south. Well, look at these photos, where you can see that there is an opening at the south of the Ricard structure. So if there was once water here, and if it neighbored the sea, this would further match Plato's description. I mean, doesn't this match what a waterway outlet would look like? And not only that, doesn't the entire region look like it was blasted by flowing water or a tsunami? You can see the striations in the land going from west to east from the ocean. Tell me that this doesn't look like a massive wave or a steady flow of water completely altered the terrain. And it's also worth mentioning that scientists have emphasized that the Ricard is heavily eroded, which the circular walls clearly show us. Now, consider Plato's exact words in regards to the aftermath of the cataclysm. Quote, "Atlantis is part of the Atlantic which is no longer accessible by ship. Atlantis, when sunk by the earthquake, became an impassable barrier of mud to voyagers sailing from hence to any part of the ocean. In other words, it became landlocked." Again, if this is the site of Atlantis, and if the details shared by Solon and Plato are true, and if the Ricard structure was the site of Atlantis, then it's not hard to see that perhaps a lot of sand or mud was pushed into Africa from the ocean during some sort of catastrophic event. And let's not forget the key detail that he mentioned regarding that the area surrounding Atlantis was a level plain which was smooth and even. Is this not another match when compared to the Ricard? Because here you can see multiple views and angles of it. And Plato said that Atlantis was sheltered by mountains to the north that were facing the south, and that the south part of Atlantis opened to the sea. So isn't that what we're seeing here, assuming that the ocean was once much further inland? And something else we should consider is that the sands of the Sahara actually originate from the sea, an interesting fact that many people are not aware of. And just to give you a comparison of just how massive this region is, compare it to the size of the United States. Perhaps the remnants of Atlantis are now under the Sahara Desert. Now here is another geological detail that matches Plato's description. He stated, quote, "The stone which they quarried was white, another black, and a third red," going on to say that the main city was constructed with red, black, and white rocks. This region just so happens to have endless amounts of loose rock which match these colors, particularly black and red, but we also see lighter colors mixed in with them as well. And real quick, what you're looking at are a few screenshots from an outstanding documentary titled Visiting Atlantis, which was filmed in 2011 by George S. Alexander and Natalice Rosen. And this documentary was the inspiration for my video, and I highly recommend you visit their website, visitingatlantis.com, for more details. And in fact, this video is currently only available on the Gaia Network. That documentary goes on to point out that the center island of the Ricard has fresh spring water that flows from it. And this here is a not so great screenshot from that documentary where the locals dug a well to prove that fresh spring water flowed from the center island of the Ricard, despite the fact that the underground water in the surrounding area is all salt water, which is interesting considering that this is 250 miles from the ocean. Perhaps further evidence that this site once met the sea. This detail about the fresh spring water coming out of the center island is significant when you compare it to what Plato said. Quote, "The god Poseidon found no difficulty in making special arrangements for the center island, bringing up two springs of water from beneath the earth, one of warm water, the other of cold. And he also specifically stated that a well near the central Acropolis provided the city with fresh water." So let's take a second to consider all the details regarding the Eye of the Sahara and Plato's description of Atlantis. First, Atlantis was said to have been destroyed 11,600 years ago, coinciding precisely with the Younger Dryas climate catastrophe. It's a circular structure that would have been made up of 3 rings of water and 2 of land, which would be the case at the Ricard if it had water in it. It has a diameter of 23.5 kilometers, which matches Plato's description of it. There are mountains to the north, which also have evidence of rivers flowing over them, just as Plato described. The entire area is surrounded by a vast plain. The south opened up to the sea, which again, if the sea were further inland, it would match the description. And if there was a tsunami that cut Atlantis off from the ocean with mud, as Plato described, then you can see in the satellite imagery how this would be possible. The center island also had fresh spring water, just as described by Plato, and despite the fact that the surrounding area has salt water underground. And the region also has black, red, and lighter color rocks. And there are other details described by Plato that I haven't even mentioned, such as that there were a great number of elephants on the island. And the documentary Visiting Atlantis pointed out that many skeletal remains of elephants have been found in the area and are even depicted on ancient rock art in the area as well. And there are other details to support that there was once a civilization there. For example, the discovered artifacts of tools and gold jewelry. And this is very interesting considering that the Ricard structure is in a remote area of the Western Sahara. But it's not just that. Plato described that Atlantis had an abundance of copper and gold. Well, Mauritania today, their number 1 exports are iron, copper, and gold. Now obviously, when you consider everything that Plato said about it, the Ricard structure is a very compelling case that must be considered. However, there is one significant detail which would exclude this site as a possible location of Atlantis, and that is its elevation being 1,300 feet above sea level. And even though the Earth's sea levels were some 400 feet higher during the height of the last ice age, that is still a considerable gap. That is unless the geography of the region was much different and the land was pushed up due to the movement of plate tectonics, which, let's not forget, the theory proposed by scientists as to the formation of the Ricard structure was that it was, quote, uplifted by molten rock that was pushed towards the surface from underneath. So consider Antarctica as an example in that the bedrock that sits below the continent laying underneath the ice is rising. And this is occurring at a very slow rate, and I am not suggesting that this is exactly what happened to the Ricard structure. I'm simply pointing out that we should consider that some plate movement may happen much quicker under certain situations that we are not yet familiar with. I mean, we were shocked to learn that the 2011 Japanese earthquake and tsunami moved the coast of mainland Japan by 8 feet in a matter of moments, and even shifted the Earth's axis. So we must consider that we don't even know what the Ricard structure is or how it was actually formed, and considering that it is so unusual, we must open our minds to new possibilities. If the Ricard structure is indeed Atlantis, then we have to ask ourselves whether this unusual land feature is natural or could it be man-made? Is it possible that what we're looking at is a man-made creation, or perhaps could it be a combination? A very unusual land feature that humans took over and modified to be an oasis for a civilization. You want to hear another fascinating detail? So the legend of Atlantis states that it was an empire made up of 10 kingdoms, and the island of Atlantis was the capital. And the god Poseidon gave birth to 5 sets of twins, so 10 children, and each one of those children went on to rule each one of those 10 kingdoms. So allegedly, Poseidon had 5 sets of twins. Does anyone want to guess what part of the world has the highest birth rate of twins per capita? Nigeria. That is one interesting fact considering its geographical proximity to Mauritania and the Ricard structure. So although we cannot say with absolute certainty that Atlantis actually existed or that the Ricard structure would be the location of it, it obviously has some very compelling and specific similarities to Solon's and Plato's description. And like I mentioned earlier, according to the experts, Atlantis is just a fictional story that Plato made up to encourage better behavior among governments and its citizens. And modern academics are saying that the story of Atlantis must be false. Yet Plato and Solon were known for their brilliance of mind and strength of character. And this is the only example, at least that I'm aware of, where they were ever accused of lying about something. And the Egyptian description of Atlantis at the Temple of Neith in Sais, Egypt, no longer exists today, although perhaps those stones could be found underneath the Nile River somewhere, but it did exist for several hundred years, possibly a millennia. And I'm having difficulty finding an exact date on the temple's destruction by the Nile River, but it was long after Solon and Plato had died. So why would Solon and Plato lie about something that could be verified back then, as it was common for people to travel to Egypt and the temple still existed at that time? And by the way, I have to point out something really interesting and, well, honestly a bit disturbing, which is that if you go to the Wikipedia page of the Ricard structure, you will not find one single word about Atlantis. And when you go to the Atlantis page on Wikipedia, you will not find one single word about the Ricard structure either. In fact, if you go to the page related to various hypotheses for the location of Atlantis, you will not find one single word related to the Ricard structure or the Eye of Africa. Nothing. And guess what else? Wiki has locked their page on Atlantis, only allowing certain unknown individuals the capability of editing the page, but whoever created it certainly made sure to mention the words pseudo-history in the first few sentences for all to see. So there is actually a lot more information to share about what Plato stated about Atlantis, and I was going to share it all in this one video, but this is getting so long, so now I'm going to make a part 2, which will probably be my next video as I already have all the information put together. I may wait, and if some new headline makes the news, I might make that video first, but be expecting that very soon because there are so many details to share about the people of Atlantis and specifics about the kingdom itself, which you will find fascinating because these details haven't really been shared and you wouldn't know about it unless you go looking for the information yourself. So with all this said, I guess I'll close it up there, but leave a comment and share your thoughts on all of this and definitely hit the like button and subscribe, but I'll leave it at that. I'm Jimmy, this is Bright Insight, and I have many more videos to come on a whole wide variety of topics. Take care, everybody.
In my opinion, both of these videos represent a possible theory of the location of Atlantis. Both sounds credible to me. I am reading at the moment an interesting book. It's Edgar Cayce. I hope you can see it. It's called On Atlantis. Edgar Cayce is one of the greatest American psychics. He died in 1940 or so. And he made incredible prophecies which have an accuracy rate of about 90% or even more. And he had interesting things to say about Atlantis. I just quickly want to read it to you. In the book Edgar Cayce on Prophecy by Mary Ellen Carter, edited by Hugh Lynn Cayce, his son, another son, the author states, quote, "From the readings we find that a great civilization once existed in the North Atlantic, in the location known as the Sargasso Sea, on a large continent about the size of Europe and Russia combined. Cayce said that it was first populated about 10,500,000 years ago, that many upheavals and changes took place during these 200,000 years of its culture, and that it was finally destroyed after 3 major cataclysms several thousand years apart, the final one being about 10,100 BC, unquote. I find this interesting. I'm listening a lot to Graham Hancock, and I find him a very well and educated researcher. And his theory is about that around 10,100, 10,200, there was a major cataclysm that led to the Ice Age and led to the damages that are found in Giza on the Sphinx and at the pyramids, because they were so much older than just the last cataclysm in 10,100. So I find there's a connection. So with this one, I want to end my presentation for today, and would like to, if you have no more questions, I would like to get started with working on your vision, on your mind, and on your memory. And I'm interested in some feedback, maybe from the last show I did, feedback about the homework I gave you, some ideas that occurred to you, some questions you might have. If not, then I continue for today with today's program. So I invite you to join me today. Sit down quietly and peacefully wherever you are. Take off your glasses. Remove your contact lenses if possible. If not, leave them in. And just loosely look around wherever you are, what you can see in your environment. You don't have to see anything clearly. Just be aware of how it feels to look around. And then slowly get your hands warm, rub them together, and have your fingers crossed like I do. Put your crossed finger over the bridge of your nose. Cover your eyes and have your eyes closed. Make sure you are supporting your elbows, maybe on your knees or on a table, wherever, so that you're sitting comfortably. And then, with your eyes closed, look into the darkness. Be aware of what you might see. If you might find some light floating around, whatever it is, maybe it's total blackness, whatever it is, be aware. Be aware of if you get a sense of space in front of you, maybe even to your sides. Just take it all in and just be aware. Now I want you to leave your eyes closed and continue to sit comfortably wherever you are, but slowly remove your hands from your face. Leave your eyes closed, please, all the time. Let your nose draw a few circles into the air. Move your head so that your nose can do that, and leave your eyes closed, please. Now, again with your eyes closed, put your magic pencil on the end of your nose and sketch an apple tree in the center of your visual field. Draw the grayish trunk with its branches stretching up in the clear blue sky. Draw the fingery roots extending down into the rich, loamy earth. Add some apple green leaves. Ask your internal lighting crew for some terrific sunlight to flood the scene and illuminate the shiny red apples that gleam in the branches. Imagine that you walk forward in your field, right up to the tree. Smell the aroma of sun-warmed grass and leaves. Reach up and pluck a single crimson apple. Polish it on your sleeve and hold it up to the light. See your face reflected in its glowing surface. Sniff the apple and take a bite. Savor the crunch and the sweet juice that fills your mouth. Toss the apple up into the clear blue sky. Aha! It descends as a red rubber ball. Throw the ball far into the distance. Follow it with your nose. It grows smaller and smaller until it disappears at the horizon. Call the ball back. It reappears. Wherever. bouncing gaily towards you. Call it into your hands. Circle and examine it with your nose. Has it collected any marks of its journey? Is it ready to fly again? Does it want to leap and sparkle and cover great distance in a single bound? Let it. The red ball is your friend and is available anytime, anywhere, to help you develop flexibility in your imagination and movement in your eyes. With this image of the red ball in your hand, slowly come back into your body. Feel yourself sitting on the chair. Feel your feet on the ground. Don't open your eyes, please. Imagine you have got a magic feather at the tip of your nose. With this magic feather, I want you to tickle the room around you. Just for a moment. And then stop and slowly open your eyes. And again, look around in your environment. Notice any change. Notice whatever you're seeing, whatever is happening. Just be aware. I want to remind you of your last week's homework I gave you to do, which was to outline circles with your nose, triangles or squares. You might have noticed that there are not a lot of circles around. It's very difficult to find them. Same goes for triangles. It's not a lot. Squares, it's easy, relatively. And you might have noticed something else. You might have noticed that it is all man-made. These shapes you will not find in nature. Nature doesn't produce proper circles or triangles and squares. And you might have noticed that, for example, if you are short-sighted, that when you discovered a triangle in the far distance or a circle, it was still possible to outline it, and it wasn't a big problem really, because it wasn't about clarity to see clearly. It was just let your nose doing the work. I hope you enjoyed it. And I want to give you another homework for this week, which is coming back to working with colors. 2 weeks ago, I asked you to outline everything with the color red, or to color it in. And this week, I want you to decide every morning when you wake up, when you get up of bed, what color you want to work with on the day. So let's say you woke up and you decided, oh, today is my blue day. So wherever you are, you would just outline quickly or sketch in quickly everything that is blue in your close up or further away. And again, it doesn't matter. You don't have to see these things clearly. Just focus on the color blue. If, let's say in the afternoon, you feel bored with blue, of course you can change the color. But make it a homework, so for every day a different color. And again, write down what you have noticed, any kind of ideas that come into your mind, any kind of experiences, any kind of new discoveries you're making. Write it all down and give me some feedback next week. So with this, I want to finish my show tonight. I wish you a good week and hope I see you again next week. Goodbye.
Humanity has been on an epic journey of discovery, learning the truth about the world we live in. New discoveries about the true origins of humanity, ancient history, free energy, as well as the systematic corruption of world governments are now on the forefront of our daily reality. Is the world headed towards destruction based on control and power? Or is an opportunity now being presented to shift and uplift into a higher consciousness? My name is Mel V, co-founder and creative director of Conscious Consumer Network, an independent broadcast network that was launched on the 1st of January 2015. In the last 3 years, Conscious Consumer Network has broadcast over 2,800 shows in multiple languages, featuring guests from across the world, whilst creating media that is aimed at the creation of a free, fair, peaceful, just, sustainable world. Conscious Consumer Network provides full training and an interactive support network for all broadcasters, and we are always looking for inspiring and educational content.
Hi, this is Lady Liberty.
And this is Mira Siegel.
In 2018, Conscious Consumer Network has expanded to multiple broadcast locations, increasing our availability and reach across the world, remaining on the cutting edge of independent media. If we wish to create a better world, we must first create better media, geared towards real education instead of indoctrination.
You guys really are what changing the world is going to be about. It's educating kids at a grassroots level.
Having become a pillar of stability in the turbulent world of independent media, we have even more going on in 2018. Conscious Consumer Network is a publicly funded network, and we rely on all of you to keep us on the air. Show your support for independent media by donating to our 2018 Network Support Fund. Dare to seek a better world. Support independent media.